Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. If you're joining us for the very first time today and you read 2 chapters a day with us for the next 20 months, you will cover the entire Bible. If you want to know where we're reading, hop onto the website below and you will see our reading plan. Today is Exodus 16 and Acts 24. And these chapters are a study of people who know about God and people who know God. People who know about God have heard stories about Him, but they haven't got a revelation of Him inside their heart. And so the Israelites here find themselves in a desert quite close to Mount Sinai. And their circumstances are not ideal. And so they begin to grumble. They say, they look up and they see there's God in the distance. He's in a cloud. They know about God. They're listening to God's leaders, Moses and Aaron, and they start to grumble and they say, listen, you should have left us. You should have left us in Egypt. At least we had pots of meat. We could have died stuffing ourselves with our pots of meat. We could have died happy in our kitchens. Now listen, I'm on a ministry trip right now. I'm not in my own kitchen. In fact, when I got up this morning, I went downstairs into the home of the person that is hosting me. I thought, I'm a little peckish. I'm going to go and look for some food. And I found this fridge, a magnificent fridge, and it's stocked, double door fridge, mind you, stocked with all sorts of stuff. But as I opened the doors of the fridge, I realized, oh, hello, I'm not at home. I mean, yesterday, if I'd gone to my fridge or my pantry, I had access to everything. But here I'm in a foreign land, and I don't have access. So I'm going to have to wait. The Israelites were in the desert, they're having to wait. It was uncomfortable. And because they didn't have an assurance of God in their heart, they began to grumble and moan. And you know what Moses says to them? You actually not moan. In verse 9, he says, you're not moaning and grumbling against me and Aaron. You're actually grumbling against God. So when God addresses Moses and Aaron, he says, listen, I'm going to give them food. I'm going to give them, but I want them to trust me. I want them to know about me every morning. Imagine, so God has this plan, go out in the morning, walk amongst the dew, and actually what I've done is I've given you provision every single morning. And I want you to come out every single morning and wonder and marvel at the coming of God and the kindness of God every day. But of course, these people don't. They hoard it up, and then maggots come into it. And he says to them, I told you, I want to come and visit you every day. I want to come be with you every morning. You know, often, if people don't know God, they reduce their revelation of God to their provision. They reduce the revelation of God to the circumstances. God says it's not about the circumstances. It's not about the provision. God, in fact, uses hard things and circumstances and provision to get our attention, to get to this very point of knowing Him. Now, if we flick over to Acts 24, the Pharisees knew about God, but they didn't know Him. And even the high priest, who was the head of their religious order, didn't know God. They knew about Him. They knew about rules and laws, and they were really grumpy because their world had been ruffled. So they got onto their mode of transport and they went 85 kilometers to Caesarea, to Felix the governor, who was holding Paul in a prison cell, and said, we want to grumble, we want to moan, we want to tell you about this guy. He's messing our temple, he's messing our lives, he's messing our people, he's starting a riot. Grumble, grumble. Why? They didn't know God. They knew about God. Felix, who's this worldly judge, calls Paul in, and you know, in Paul's talking to Felix, we get an understanding of what it is to know God when you're in a foreign land, when the circumstances aren't going well. And you know what it says here? It says, when at that time he was hoping that Paul offer him a bribe, so Felix used to send for Paul. And then when 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Prochorus. But because Felix wanted to grant the Jews a favor, he left Paul in prison for 2 years. 2 years. I mean, that's worse than me down here on a ministry trip. And yet, nothing of grumbling. This is how Paul reveals to us what's in his heart. When he's preaching to Felix, who keeps asking him to come out of jail and talk to him, he says this. He says, I love being generous to the poor. He says, I love being able to give offerings. He says, I love the Old Testament, the law and the prophets that point to Jesus. But then this is what he says. He says, this is what I have hope in. I have hope in the resurrection. And he's talking about the resurrection of Jesus and our resurrection for all eternity. And this is what he spoke to Felix about day in and day out. Faith in Jesus. Trust in Jesus. You know, when our circumstances get tough, this is what God's looking on. Do you trust me? Do you have faith in me? When the food dries up, when the desert sun scorches, when you're sitting in your own prisons, God says, trust me.